Today is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022, and I'm Joe Reingold, and I'm here with Sherry Zander for an interview today. Hello, Sherry. I hope you're feeling better. I know you've had a series of things going on there, operation, and we're happy you're here with us today. First of all, tell us a little bit about your past, your family, your grandparents, your parents, where they were from, whatever you know about them, where they lived, what they did for a living, etc., brought up until the time when you were born.
Oh, okay. It's a lot.
Whatever you want to tell about it, that's
That's
okay.
okay. My family are 100% Ashkenazi Jews, and my two of my grandparents came from Russia, and one came from what is now Ukraine, and my paternal grandfather, Harry Levine, for whom I'm named, came from a town in what is now Ukraine, but was part of the Austria-Hungarian Empire at the time. His family they all came in the early to mid 1890s, first to New York and then on to Milwaukee, which is where I am from. My other grandmother came from an area of Poland, which I don't know what it was at the time, and it was Ada Fink Levine, and they probably came to the United States about 1905, 1906. She would tell people she was from England because she had lived there from the age of about 2 until she was 14, and she had a wonderful British accent that served her well the rest of her life. But so they came from Eastern Europe and all settled in Milwaukee. They were very, very, very poor, typical Jewish story. And I had what would be a great uncle, a brother of a great grandmother I have had, who first had my understanding is a delicatessen in Milwaukee, and sold sundries. And so anyway, my family on my father's side are the Levines. It was actually Leuvenauer, Leuwenauer with an umlaut, which they changed to Levine, LE, Vine. And my mother's parents, they're the ones that both came from Russia. My grandfather, William Groden, was the oldest of what was originally 13 children. 4 died, and there was a 25-year age range from start to finish with the kids, but he was the oldest. And my grandmother was Rose Labarsky, who came here at about a year old, so that would have been earlier 1890s. Anyway, they all ended up in Milwaukee. I do not know how the Grodens and Labarskys wound up there, but I had huge family when I was growing up. And now everybody has moved this way and that way. Anyway, they all lived there all my life. My parents were both born there. My parents are Lois Groden Levine, and my father he's deceased, Edward Levine. And they're a typical, I think, in many ways, first generation story, because they grew up comfortable, well off, particularly my father's family. And they lived in the suburbs along Lake Michigan in Shorewood and Whitefish Bay, and they had wonderful lives. And my parents got married in 1948. They had met at like a high school fraternity sorority party. My father was a couple years older. My mother was born Lois Groden in 1927, and my father was born in Edward Levine in 1925. Again, both in Milwaukee. I was born in 1952 in Milwaukee, and grew up again on the east side suburbs in what's called the North Shore of Milwaukee in Fox Point. I have 2 sisters. I always say we're all the same age because there's 3 years and 8 months from start to finish, but I have a sister, Susan, who lives in Milwaukee and is married, and I have a sister, Robin, who lives in Minneapolis, and I'm in the middle, and we are currently 67, 69, and 71. And I'm not sure where to go with this, but there's so much to say.
Yeah, right. Whatever you want. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, what it was like, elementary school, high school, and then past high school, what you did after that.
Okay. I went to Bayside School, and whenever I tell people about my education, they say, "Oh, you went to all private schools." I went to no private schools ever, not for college, not for anything. But I got what was a superb education. It was absolutely prep school education. Um, but it was the public school in the area where I lived. And I went there. We had 2 years of kindergarten, and it went all the way through 8th grade back then. So I was at the same school for 10 years, which is another reason why people think, oh, I must have gone to private school. But that's just the way the system was.
Right.
And my sisters did the same. And it was just outstanding education. And I'm going to throw in a couple of things here. I didn't know how good it was. I knew it was good, but I think until I arrived in Texas, I didn't realize how superior my education was, because I constantly, to this day, make references to things, and people say, didn't you learn that in school? And they go, no. And I always say, oh, well, we learned that. We learned that in elementary school. Of course, elementary went through 8th grade. Or, oh, gee, I learned that in school growing up. And as an example, something like 95% of my graduating class from high school went to college. It was absolutely geared to that. And they went to great colleges, great schools. We had a lot of people who went to Harvard and Yale, the Ivies and so forth. But things like they wanted us to be completely prepared for life. They wanted us to be able to not only know a lot, but be able to do a lot. So an example is from 5th grade to 8th grade, all of the girls had, and remember, this would have been in the early 60s. All of the girls had what we called home economics, twice or 3 times a week, alternating with art or music or whatever. These were not choices. We had to take it, and I loved it. Well, I learned how to embroider. I learned how to sew, make clothes, how to decorate, how to sew absolutely everything, how to use the machine and patterns, and how to cook, and how to use different kinds of thermometers, meat thermometers, candy thermometers, how to use every kind of cooking thing. We learned proper manners, which we also learned at home, so it was reinforced at school. We were taught all of the graces. We were taught how to write a business letter, how to write a thank you note, the correct way to address everybody and everything. I mean, it would take me days to tell you just all the subjects. And this is in addition to very high level academics, because people were going to college. They just really taught us everything, because I don't know if it was the German mentality, because Wisconsin is quite German. But I do know that I got a superior education. There are probably very few places here in the state of Texas that I don't think there's any place that gives kids, public or private, what we got growing up back in the 50s and 60s at my school and all my schools. They were just fabulous. So I went to Bayside School through 8th grade, and then I went on to Nicolay High School for 4 years, and got an excellent education. And as an example, we had, and I don't know what they have now, but for languages, we had German, Spanish, French, Russian. I think later they added Mandarin and Hebrew. They have a Hebrew club there. I know that. Right now they do. It was just, everything was just a little more. It was just better. But I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that this is what it was, and it was good. So I think I had an excellent, excellent educational background. After that, I knew in high school that I wanted to be an art teacher. I just loved doing art. I loved making things, creating things, designing things, putting things together. So I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison and got a degree I graduated high school in 1970 and got my bachelor's degree in art education in 1974. And I then went after that to Iowa State University for graduate school. In later years, I have regretted I didn't finish my master's degree there. It was a master's in applied arts, and it was in crafts design. and it was really an excellent program. But I think the school was huge, but it was like the Texas A&M of Iowa, and it was too Aggie for me. So I left and I went back to Milwaukee, and I wasn't sure what to do. And I started substitute teaching, and I taught in districts all over. And one of the art teachers where I was substitute teaching said, I think you would really enjoy working at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And he introduced me to the person who did the hiring. And this was part-time, so it didn't interfere with the day, but for almost 5 years, I taught children's and adult classes at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Meanwhile, I was still doing all of my art, and I was working a lot in textiles, always with color. And I had work that was in quite a few juried shows, and I would sell work here and there. And but I was I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but I was having a lot of fun and dating different people. And I'll just throw this in: I didn't get married until I was 34, and that was here in Texas.
Wait, I want to stop you for 1 second, Sherry.
Mhm.
I want to go backwards for just a minute before we go on past that, which I want to hear about. Tell us a little bit about if there were any activities or any type of things that your parents and you were involved in as far as Jewish activities in Milwaukee while you were growing up there.
Oh, okay. It's my parents grew up, both of them grew up Reform Jewish, as did I. And we belonged to a temple that had broken off from the big Temple Emmanuel, which would be like the equivalent of the one here in Dallas. It was the big old guard kind of place. And we belonged to a congregation that was Temple Sinai. It was a lot of young families, and it was, it was people like us. Everybody lived kind of on the north shore of Milwaukee. Nobody came from the west side, which was somewhat more conservative, more orthodox. And I went all through Sunday school. I was confirmed when I was at the end of my sophomore year of high school. And they did something very odd. They started teaching us Hebrew in Sunday school when I was in 5th grade. And I became very fluent at reading it. I could just whip right through it and pronounce it correctly and really read well. I remember at that Passover Seder that year reading it, and my father said, "Wow." Mm-hmm. And then when I was in 6th grade, they stopped. They did not teach Hebrew anymore. They didn't keep us going. So it's very interesting because most of the prayers and so forth, they would be in English, and they would say them. There's certain things I know that are in Hebrew, and there's a lot that I still don't even know to this day, because we never memorized it, if you will, when I was growing up in this very Reformed congregation. But that's the way it was in the 50s and 60s, and I know it was that way here as well. We never lit candles on Friday night. We never went to Shabbat services, ever. We just never, ever did. But my sisters and I went all the way through until the end of our sophomore years in high school. And we always went to temple on the high holidays and always, had a wonderful Passover Seder, got together with our family and had Hanukkah parties and things like that. We did all of those kinds of things, but we never, ever went to services on Shabbat or lit candles or had challah or any of that. So, it's I guess sort of unusual, and people are surprised at that, but that's just the way it was. I didn't know anybody else that did. I'm sure there were people who did. I just didn't know them.
At that point, did you join any Jewish organizations as a teenager?
I sure did. I was in BBG, and I was a sweetheart for an AZA chapter, which thankfully in Milwaukee was not like the slaughterhouse that it seems to be in Dallas. It's
gotten worse here, believe me. When I was a sweetheart also, it was probably more like what your experiences were. So yeah,
it was just sort of an honorary title. And yes, I must say, I'm editorializing here, but both of my daughters were nominated to be sweethearts, and we went to walk down, and it's cruel. It's cruel, and I'm glad that this is on recording, because it should be for time immemorial. That the way the sweetheart choosing has to be cut out. It's nasty. And the kids who are that age are at a particularly vulnerable mental state about who am I, what am I, and then it's terrible. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was a very nice experience. They did it quietly in each chapter. Each AZA chapter chose somebody, and then they would just let the person know, in my case, call me up and say, would you like to be the sweetheart of our chapter? And then we would say yes, and then there would be a sweetheart ball that anybody could go to, but that's where they would present us, and we sweethearts would wear a formal gown, and the president of the AZA chapter would escort us down the aisle as they presented the sweethearts. And it was very lovely and very nice. And we didn't do a whole lot more than that.
That's good. Okay. Okay. So now go back to your work history. Tell us some of the projects and things that have been memorable for you that you worked on while you were still there. And then tell us how you got to Dallas.
Well, people say, how did you happen to come to Dallas? And I always say a big mistake, but I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
So anyway, so I got to the age of 20, about 24, 25, and I knew I had to get a full-time job. So somebody that my parents knew that there was an opening at the MS Society of Southeastern Wisconsin, which was half the population of Wisconsin. It was 7 counties, for a really great, interesting job called, you were the director of the MS Readathon, which back then in the 70s was a great thing. It was a fundraiser to raise money for MS research. And I had to go, it was really great. I had to go to every single school I could possibly sign up in southeastern Wisconsin in 7 counties. Didn't matter, public, private, Catholic, Lutheran, a lot of Lutheran schools there, and so forth, to sign up the kids. And I'd give an assembly. I'd have to, buddy up to the principals and the superintendents to get permission to do it. And then they'd have an assembly for all the kids. And it was really fun. We'd show a film, and I'd get the teachers to sign up the kids to read books for pledges. And they could win prizes depending on how much money they raised, or how many books they read. And that was a fun job. And I also dealt with all of the radio and TV stations. And I had to do all of this stuff. I had to find a celebrity that would be the honorary chairperson of it, because we would use their name in their picture. So I did some work with the Brewers and a wonderful, handsome baseball player named Mike Hegan. I always remember, he was so nice. And I did just all kinds of things with the media, because I had to do all of the PR, the publicity for this. And I also had to drive around and give all of the, and I had to get people to donate all of the prizes. So I'd go to different companies and get all kinds of prizes donated, and on and on and on and on. I mean, it was really, what I didn't realize at the time, and then subsequently did, is it was a sales job. I was getting all kinds of people to do stuff for the MS Society, and I was the salesperson. I had to ask them to donate all kinds of things, or to read the books, or to let me do the assemblies, or whatever it was.
And that's where your teaching skills probably came in too. It's all a combination. Yeah.
Well, they wanted somebody who would be good at writing and speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted somebody with teaching experience. They wanted somebody familiar with the schools. And so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So how long did you stay with them?
Well, I actually only stayed with them for about a year. And I was in my mid-20s then, and I took another job that I stayed at for about 3 years with the Wisconsin Society to Prevent Blindness. And very similar type of job. I had to, and again, I got to really know all of the media outlets in town. And of course, when you work for a nonprofit, the board is always all of the very, the big names around town. So that was really a fun kind of a job for a young woman. And I met so many people, and so many interesting people. I did special events fundraising. So when I got to the MS Society in my prior job, that was already set up. I had to create the events and then do everything I already told you about, get everything under the sun donated. So I did all kinds of things. And the two that stand out the most, I did a ski event, and I did something called Flip for Sight, which was a gymnastics event.
Wow.
Where I had to get a shopping center to allow me to take over like the main atrium of the shopping center. And of course I'd have to get a celebrity person there to be the MC. And I had to get all of the different gymnastics schools and organizations to have their kids come and compete for pledges. And
Right, right.
again, do all the publicity and the same things I already told you about. But it was always fun. But two that really, really stand out. One was there was a racquetball tournament, and I created the thing from scratch, and then it became a prototype that people did around the country, and I actually won an award for it nationally. And they brought me to New York for their annual meeting where everybody was there, and so that was really terrific.
That's wonderful.
It
Yeah.
really was. It was a neat event, and yeah, it's funny. I come to Texas, and I didn't spend a dime on getting prizes or anything, and I find here that people they make a lot of money because I have to tell you, up in Wisconsin, you know, we'd always see, well, which chapter around the country is doing the best with this or the best with that. Texas, and this is long before I knew I would be moving here, Texas was always the biggie. And I subsequently realized when I moved here, it was because they spend a lot of money to do these events. I didn't spend anything. I didn't have any money to spend. We were a little organization, and I got everything donated. If there were invitations we printed, I found somebody to print those invitations for no money, and we put their name on them. You know, I got a trip to Las Vegas donated as the grand prize. Well, I didn't pay a dime for that trip. I got somebody to donate it, a travel business. So on and on and on. But it was interesting, and I got to know. I had to get all kinds of PSAs and free commercials made at the TV stations and at the radio stations. So I got to know everybody there. Anyway, I did this for about 3 years. So that was a big event. And then the last event I did that was so much fun. We only had 10 days notice. I'd gotten in touch with the Milwaukee Bucks organization and the guy who would be my counterpart. And he said he would never give me an answer as to whether they could do this. Finally, 10 days before the event, I get a call. He says, you know what, we can do the event now. The event was called Tip the VIP. And it was at a restaurant. I had to call everybody up all of a sudden at 10 days before. And it was a smashing success. It was the last event I did. And the Milwaukee Bucks, the actual players, came out, and people would come. And I called up everybody I knew in town and said, tell your friends, make reservations, blah, blah, blah. And I got all kinds of things donated for an auction there too. And of course got a celebrity MC person who was a DJ for a radio station, a big morning guy. And it was at a wonderful steakhouse, and the place was packed, and the waiters were the Milwaukee Bucks. And yeah, it's like if you went to a restaurant here and all the waiters were the Dallas Mavericks. And it wasn't just a few of them, it was the whole team. And it was so much fun. I mean, so much fun. And again, I had to do all the publicity and get the newspapers out there, and but what I had to do was call a lot of people who I knew. And of course, my family had been living there since the 1890s, and this was in the 70s. I knew lots of people. I called my parents' friends and everybody I knew and said, hey, you know, this thing just came up and I want to let you know about it. Really great. So that was my last event. But the reason it was my last event, I was there 3 years. I worked for a nonprofit, and I was a nonprofit too. I mean, they don't pay much at all. And I just thought, I'm single. I've got to start making some money. So at the age of 29, I took a job working for a radio station in Milwaukee. It was at that time, they still had commercial classical radio stations around the country. Dallas has the only one left. But this was a for-profit classical radio station. And I got into the radio business. And I was in that business for close to 11 years. And by that time, I had bought myself a little house in Shorewood, which is one of the North Shore suburbs, very close to Lake Michigan. And I thought I lived in the smallest house there. And I later found out it's on the historic walking tour. I did. I lived in the smallest house in Shorewood. But it was great living there. It was very well located and everything. So I had a good time. I had a good time being single. You know, I had my ups and downs, of course. But it was an interesting time. And again, until I think my jobs overlapped, because I still, on Saturdays and a couple of nights a week, still would teach classes at the Milwaukee Art Museum. So that was wonderful exposure too, and a whole just a whole different avenue.
Did you meet your husband there or,
No,
or elsewhere?
no, and it's a funny story. So what happened is I was I dated different people and so forth. And one night I get a call, and it's this guy, and he says, "Listen, I hope you don't think this is creepy or whatever, but I'm I I know a lot of people that that we know in common, and I would like to meet you." And he'd seen me. He'd seen me around town or whatever, and asked different friends of his, and I'm going to tell you right now, he knew I was Jewish. He knew I was Jewish from the outset, and that plays a very important role in my story. Very important role, particularly in my Jewish life. And he asked if I would meet him for a glass of wine or something. So I said, okay, that was fine. And he told me the people that he knew all these Jewish people. And I met him, and he was cute. He was cute, and he was a Jewish mother's dream. He was an MD, PhD. He was finishing his MD. He only had to do 3 years because he already had a PhD in neuroscience or something. And he was a brain surgeon. I'm telling you, a Jewish mother's dream. And he was about to leave to go to Texas because he had gotten a very prestigious residency down here at Parkland Hospital with Dr. Kenneth Clark. And he was a very famous neurosurgeon who had when he worked on Kennedy and so forth.
Yeah.
So he had a few more months. So we started dating. But the thing I haven't mentioned yet is that he was Lutheran. His 2 roommates were Jewish. They were in medical school with him. All the people he knew that he asked about, who do you know who that woman is, blah, 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 I'd like to meet her. They were Jewish. So he knew, but he was Lutheran. So we were dating and everything. And it started to come up. He thought I should be Christian. And I can tell you, I have every single cell in me is so Jewish, even though I was raised Reform. I'm Jewish. I'm a Jew. And so anyway, we continued to date. I met him in about this time of year, and then he moved in at the end of June of that year, which was 1983, to Dallas. I helped him move down, and he got settled, and I would see him about once a month. We'd go back and forth, mostly me coming here. And then it just became more and more difficult because he really, before I go any farther, we talked about getting married. So we went and visited with his pastor, who he'd kind of grown up with. And that pastor was living in Denver. So we drove out there, we stayed at his house, and we went skiing and stuff. We had a fun time. The pastor was a great guy. But I said, I'm not asking Phil to be Jewish, but I'm never going to be a Christian. I'm not asking him to change, and I'm not changing. Anyway, we did get engaged. I did move here. I moved here in March of 1984. And I was in the radio business. I was having a lot of success there. I'd been selling radio for about 2.5 years, a couple years. And so I had to find a job. And if you're good at it, you can get a job. So I interviewed at several places, and I got an excellent job at KRLD, which at the time was considered the top job in Dallas if you did what I did. And but he and I struggled more and more with this, and he was working all the time. And we split up. Briefly got back together, but then split up in July. And it was a very tough time for me because I had no family here. I was new to town. Again, I'm going to be honest here. I did not find the Jewish community here welcoming. They did not. I did have a few people who were nice, but nobody made sure that they invited me on the holidays, like at Passover or high holidays. There were people I was very friendly with, and I even sort of hinted. I said, gee, I'd sure love to have a place at your Passover table. And I don't know. I'd have to ask my grandmother. I can tell you, when I lived in Milwaukee, I knew 2 guys who were from other places who were working in Milwaukee, Jewish guys, and I didn't have to ask Grandma. And Grandma always threw a very elegant deal with lots of help and beautiful everything. But I knew that if you had a Jewish person that you wanted to invite to come for Passover, invite them and then say, hey, Grandma, I've got a friend coming. And this guy said, oh, I'm not sure if I could do that. And I let it go. So it was an interesting time. Again, I was doing well in my business. I was meeting people. I was making friends. And I decided, and I do this, what I'm about to tell you to this day, I created my own family of friends here. And I started doing my own Passover Seder. And I would find other people, friends who weren't from here and didn't know anybody or whatever, or didn't have family. And I'd say, well, come on over, or other, there were young marrieds that I was friends with, and they knew that they were going to come to my house. They were from all over. And this was the funny thing about this doctor that I had been dating. Before I moved here, there was a New Year's Eve party, 1983 going into 1984, and Phil was on duty at the hospital, and he wasn't off till midnight. But he had a bunch of friends. The guys were all surgery residents, and they were all young marrieds, and they all were Jewish. But they were having a New Year's Eve party at somebody's house in the village, and Phil lived in the village. He said, I'm going to send one of the guys over there to walk you back to the party because there's no reason for you to wait for me. So I didn't know anybody, but one of the guys came over, and these people were from other places, Atlanta, New York, Baltimore, Michigan. And we had a blast. There must have been 15 people there. Everybody was so terrific. And I am still friends to this day with those people. Mm. And one couple we're very, very close friends with. So that was just another funny thing that happened. And nobody's really friends with him. It's not that they don't like him. He lives up in New York, and he's got a major, major job. He's the head of neurosurgery up at Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York. I guess he's internationally known. In fact, I know he is, but I don't really follow him too much. But anyway, so I made all these nice friends, and it was really great. And then he and I split up at July of '84, and I felt very alone. But the other thing is, I'm a Wisconsin girl, and I don't like heat. I never did. I can't take heat. I can't take any heat. If it starts to get above 80, I start to get uncomfortable. And when it's in the 90s, I can pass out. So, yeah, so that's been kind of difficult all these years.
Oh, yeah, big adjustment. Right.
Well, I've worked that one out too. I don't spend the summer here anymore, and I haven't for a long time. Okay. But I made my friends, and as I said, I created a family of friends who are my friends anyway. But on the holidays, we all get together like we just had Passover. We have a blast. None of our families live here. And they all know if they've got a friend that doesn't have a place to go, just call, like with my grandma or my parents. Mm-hmm. We're very open about that. Call me up and say, hey, I'm bringing somebody else. Or I've got a friend and he's got a girlfriend. Can they come? Oh, sure, of course, bring them,
Right.
It's just how we are, but I never found Dallas to be that welcoming. And I think if I'd married somebody who was from Dallas, it would be different. But I didn't marry somebody who was from Dallas. And it's I find that attitude to be still somewhat pervasive. And I'm sorry to say it, because I've had some very lovely experiences here, but that's been a recurring thread, if you will.
Well, that was actually one of our questions is how did you find the Dallas Jewish community when you got here, and how has it changed since you've been here? So tell me that part of it. Any changes at all that you've seen, or any growth, anything besides numbers? Yes, we've got
in the Jewish community particularly.
Yeah.
Not really.
No.
I'm just being honest here.
Okay.
Not really.
All right.
And I'm part of things here. I know loads and loads of people. I've been here 38 years. When people say, how long have you lived here? I go, 38 hot, sweaty years. But again, I let that go at a very early time in my life here, because I had to, or I would have always felt like an outsider. And I don't feel like an outsider. I've created my own inner circle, if you will. Although, and my children know this too, people are very welcome in my home. And I grew up that way. If I had a friend, they were welcome in our home. And it didn't matter what religion, what color, what race, anything. People were always welcome in our home. And I grew up in a beautiful home in a very nice neighborhood, but we weren't snobby.
Mhm.
We just weren't snobby. But here no, I don't think it's changed very much. Mm-mm. I don't. A lot of things have changed. I think Dallas is a much, much, much better city than the one I moved to in 1984. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. It's not my kind of city. It's not a city. I think maybe had people been more welcoming, I would have felt that way, but felt differently. But it's not my kind of city. But it is a great city. It is a great city. I would tell people to come visit here. I would say a lot of very, very good things about it. But I don't think the Jewish community, it's a bigger version of, it's just a bigger version of what and I will say this too. I think, we are comfortable. My husband and I are financially comfortable. We live in a lovely home that we've been in for 33 years and we like that. We travel, we have a good life. But had my husband or I, or both of us become fabulously wealthy, well, I think that there would have been much greater acceptance.
Mhm.
But we're comfortable. And in my Midwestern way, and my sister pointed this out to me a couple weeks ago when she was visiting. She pointed out all the people we knew Jewish people we knew who were, and not Jewish, who were very, very, very wealthy. They didn't flash it around. They would live in a nice house. They might have another house in another place that would be much bigger and fancier, but people weren't flashy. And so that's always been, that's always seemed really different to me, shall we say. Yeah.
How did you meet your husband? You said that he wasn't from here either.
He was not from here, but we have a Milwaukee connection, we found out. My husband, Ron, was a couple years ahead of me in school. And he is from New Orleans. And on his father's side of the family, the Zanders and the Levys, which is the maternal grandparent, his grandmother's side, they go back to the mid 1800s in Louisiana. And they were from Alsace-Lorraine, so they spoke French and German.
Mhm.
And they came from like Metz and Strasbourg and right around that area in Eastern France and Western Germany. And the Levys moved to the Cajun country. They lived in Donaldsonville and Thibodaux and those places. And there is a historic little Jewish cemetery in Donaldsonville, and the old synagogue there, which I've written an article about, is now, and it was built in the 1860s, it's an Ace Hardware store. But I have pictures in an article that I wrote. I can't remember if it was the TJP or the other Jewish newspaper that was here, comparing the two. But anyway, they came from that area, and they lived there for quite a few years. The Zanders came to New Orleans in the, I think 1880s, and they came from Germany. And nobody changed any names. That's pretty unusual.
Mhm.
Anyway, so Ron's mother's side of the family, that's his father's side. On his mother's side, they had come to Utica, New York originally. His great-grandfather wrote a 50-page memoir, single-spaced, all about this. So I have a lot of knowledge about it. And they lived always up in the north, and they were very poor, of course, but his great-grandfather became very well off, and he moved all over the place. And he would go to certain boom towns. So one of the places he lived, and he lived there almost 50 years probably, was up in Ashland, Wisconsin, which if you were to look at a map and you look way, way, way up at the top, you will find Bayfield and Ashland. And Ashland was kind of a boom town. It was major shipping. It's right on Lake Superior. And it had a synagogue. They had a tiny little synagogue. And his grandfather was born and raised there. And his grandmother's family moved in the 1860s to Waukesha, Wisconsin. And I won't go through their whole story, but somebody set them up. She was his grandparents. I don't know who set them up, but his mother's side of the family on both sides are from Wisconsin. And it turned out, so here I was, became friends with Janet and Jack Baum. And Ron became friends with Janet and Jack Baum. So I met him a couple of times. I was dating somebody else. People were setting me up with this one and that one. And he had been seeing somebody for a number of years. And so when we met, I just thought, oh, he's a fun guy. I just thought he was fun, and met him a few times. And then I was working at KRLD, which was with the Dallas Cowboys flagship station at the time. And I said, you know, I'm taking my very best clients and their wives for lunch at the Stadium Club and then to a Cowboys game. And I was talking to Janet. I said, I can ask one of these guys. They're all very nice, but I'd rather either go on my own because I know the wives and these guys, the three guys, or take somebody who's just a friend who I don't have to worry about. And she said, well, why don't you call Ron Zander? I said, oh, that's a good idea. I'll call good old Ron Zander. I called good old Ron Zander. And he said, oh, sure, that would be really great. Well, we had a really nice time. Everything went great. And then he started calling me, and I was dating different people, and I had activities with the radio station with all of the stuff going on. And he called me on a Friday, and he said, asked what if I wanted to go to a movie that night. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. And then he said, well, how about tomorrow night, Saturday? I said, oh, I'm sorry, I already have plans. I'd love to do it, but you know, I've got plans already. So then he called me. I would see him, but then he called me that Wednesday and asked me to go out Saturday. I said, oh, I've already got plans, but I would date him, and during the week, you know, meet him for lunch or this or that. So then the next week he asked me a week in advance, and he said he wanted me to go to the, oh, I forgot what it was called, one of those fundraising balls that were a lot of fun that a lot of young people went to. And it was formal. Dallas was very, very formal back then. And it was, you know, floor length and black tie. And he said, did I want to go to the Bellini ball? And I said, well, actually, I can't because I actually already have a date to the Bellini ball. And I'm telling you that because if you do go, you will see me there. So we did. And he started asking me more in advance for the weekends. And after a very short time, I was just dating him. And we ended up getting married. Oh, but so the oddball thing is his mother's side of the family in Milwaukee knew my family, knew my dad's family, and they knew each other because they lived there for decades and decades and decades. So people in our families already knew each other. It turns out when Ron was a senior in high school, he really wanted, he had so much fun when he'd come up to to Milwaukee in the summers and visit his grandparents, especially as a teenager. And they said, oh, you should come up here and go to school at Whitefish Bay High School. That's the suburb that they lived in. And my dad graduated from Whitefish Bay High School too. And so his senior year, he went and lived with his grandparents in Milwaukee on the North Shore. And so when we met, we started talking, and it turns out we know all these people in common. He dated a bunch of girls I knew from BBYO, and a bunch of guys he was friends with I knew from BBYO, but we never met. But we figured out that we were in the same place once at the same time. The year he lived with his grandparents, 1967, 68, we would have been in high holiday services together at Temple Sinai because his grandparents belonged to the same temple. So we figured we were in the same place, but we never met until
All world, yeah.
1985, right. But Ron was doing nothing Jewish at all. And but I brought him around. Over the years. Anyway, about a year later, we got married. And he was even having a problem with, he was not going to wear a yarmulke at his wedding. He was not doing that. So I just quietly went and bought a beautiful bridal yarmulke, you know, that's meant for a man, but it's white and it's embroidered and it's gorgeous and everything. And he wore it. And over the years, I've brought him along. But I want to go back to the Jewish thing, because the fellow I was seeing who was Lutheran said, well, I don't understand why being Jewish is so important to you. He said, I never see you going to temple. I don't see you, you know, you don't go every week or do this or do that. And I said to him, you know, you're right, but I feel 100% Jewish all the time. And that is not a function of my showing up in temple. I just feel it. And of course, as we all know, there is a genetic component to being Jewish. So it's not a religion. I hate when people call it a faith, because it's not blind faith. It's a way of living. It's a behavior. It's a thought process. I mean, that's what I think. So what that did was very interesting. It sent me into And I was 31 when I moved here, and I'm 69 years old now. So it sent me into a 38-year informal, I would say, exploration of why do I feel so Jewish? What does it mean to be Jewish? And it's been a wonderful personal education. And I went to Talmud class at Temple Emmanuel. We're members. I went there for 20 years until I went back to work full time. So I couldn't be there at 7:30 on Wednesday morning. But I learned a lot, and I've done some reading, and it's really been a terrific thing. You know, had I not moved to Dallas, I don't think I ever would have had that personal Jewish education. And I've really worked at imparting that to my own children, you know, the things I have learned.
Are they here? Do they still live in Dallas?
No, and this is also very interesting. My husband had never been married either, and we were 34 and 36 when we got married. I always kind of knew that I probably wouldn't be able to get pregnant, and so I did fertility work and all of that. My mother had taken DES when she was pregnant with my older sister and me. So neither of us ever was able to get pregnant because of that. But we adopted 2 girls, one through Jewish Family Service in 1996, and one through a local agency here, Hope International, from Russia. We went over there in 2000. She was already a year and 4 months old. So my older daughter, Rosie, who is named after my grandmother's, lives in Austin now. She attended UT. And my younger daughter, Heather, is 23, and she is finishing up at UNT, and she's majoring in elementary education. So they both went to Temple Emmanuel. They were both in BBYO. They both, you know, they were confirmed there. And we have done all of these things. But one of the things that was interesting, again, this is important, about my learning that, and I tell everybody this, and non-Jews are particularly fascinated when I tell them this. I said, one of the things that I have learned is that as Jews, we are not about blind faith at all, but we are a religion of behavior. And I explain a little bit about the Talmud, 613 laws that tell us how we are to live, how we are to behave, how we are to be Jewish. You know, if we're Jewish, this is how we are supposed to be, or these are our how to handle things, how to handle life. People say, that sounds
Just
really
lost
great.
your sound, Sherry.
What?
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
It was, for some reason, the sound went away. Go ahead. That's
okay.
fine.
Anyway, so yeah, I people say, oh, that sounds really great. I go, yeah, it's really great. That's why I like being exactly what I am. That's why I'm never changing to a different, you know, religion, because it's really how we behave that makes us what we are, not just in our genetics, of course. And of course, we have wonderful people who convert and take on those laws and so forth, and the behaviors. So it's been great. It's really been terrific. But what I was going to say is, one of our teachers, we've had a variety of teachers over the years, one of our teachers in our Talmud class ran into me in the library one day, and he said, at Temple, and he said, you should read this book. This will change your life. I said, really? And he said, yeah. And it was, I don't pronounce it correctly, so I won't even say it. I'm not good with Hebrew or Yiddish or whatever, but it's Guard Your Tongue, about Lashon Hara.
Lashon Hara, right.
Lashon Hara. Okay.
Very important principle. Yes, yes.
And I get the daily little email blurbs, and I tell people about some of them. And you know, when they ask me about, you know, being Jewish, I say, yeah, these things tell us how to conduct ourselves in different situations and so forth. And so I love that. I love that because it makes sense to me. So
my along that line, my final question to you is this. Think about this. What do you think you are the most proud of? It's not a trick question. Whatever you think. What are you the most proud of throughout your lifetime, and what you've achieved, and et cetera?
That's a mammoth question.
Okay. You can give a few answers if you like.
I'm not sure I would say proud as much as glad.
Okay.
Glad that I have the life that I do, that I am happy with my choices, Nobody makes great choices all the time, but I'm very, very happy with my choices. I'm happy to be me. Certainly happy to be Jewish. Yeah, I'm really glad to lead the life that I do. I can tell you a few things that I've done. One of the things that I did going back 20 years, a little longer, and I've never put it into a book, and I still need to. One of my explorations was going to small towns. I didn't realize how many people had lived in really tiny towns that were Jewish and made Jewish lives. So I started studying and really studying these. And I've given many, 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 many talks around the country and in Dallas. I do a whole talk on just small town Texas synagogues, but I focus particularly on towns that have had synagogues. And they're small. They're not almost never more than 50,000 people would be a big town. The smaller, the better, like Schulenburg, Texas.
Mhm.
But I took many photos and wrote articles and gave talks to, and I had a fellowship at the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, gave talks to I gave one talk that was required to the rabbis and professors there, the students, but really exploring the Jewish life of the people in small towns across America and what made them who they were and what kept them going. And because a synagogue that's a major commitment. And if you're a little tiny town like way up on the UP of Michigan, and you've got, 15 members, and they're keeping this beautiful little old synagogue going and having Passover Seders and high holidays and bringing in rabbis, that's a statement. And the histories are all funny and fun and great and heartwarming. So that's something I'm proud of, that I've done that and still can put it in a book and probably will.
I hope you do. And we'd love you to make a presentation to us, to the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. That's what we're all about.
I did a
Talking
long
about
time
Jewish
ago.
history all around here. So yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm so glad that the organization has grown and flourished.
Mhm. We have.
And I want to throw something, I know we don't have a lot of time, I want to throw something in there that I think is so great. 100 years ago, no, about 30 years ago, I was asked to be on the board of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. And I literally would fall asleep in the meetings. And it was kind of people who'd lived there for, lots of generations, and they didn't really want to take in anything new, kind of like inviting new people to your home for holidays. But I have seen your organization just burst open with fascinating programs, just great offerings to the community. I think it's wonderful, and I want to compliment you on that. I think it's really, really great. And this interview is an example of opening up to who's here and who's Jewish and what our histories are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you for doing this with me, and this will live on. We're so happy that you decided to stay in Dallas and grow here with us and be here. So
it's been a good life. It has been a good life.
That's good. My parents have a similar story, which I'll tell you about another time. But anyway, I want to thank you very much, Sherry, and continue to grow and come see us and do a few presentations. That would be wonderful with us. We'd love it. All right.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for doing this too.
Thank you. Thank you. And have a wonderful rest of your Passover this
Okay.
week.
You too.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.